US President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin are meeting in Alaska for a summit that could lead to a peace agreement in Ukraine. Ukraine will, however, not be represented at the meeting, leading the country's leader, Vladimir Zelenskyy, to say, "We are counting on America." Now, SABC News correspondent Nick Harper is in Washington. We now cross live to him. Nick, thank you so much for your time this evening here in SABC News. Let's start off here. What can we expect from this meeting?
Yeah, good evening. Expectations going into this seem to have been lowered by the White House. We're told that the president is optimistic, that he's bullish. A White House official earlier saying he was both prepared and upbeat. But at the same time, Donald Trump is saying that there is a 25% chance that things will go south during the course of this meeting, that quite simply there will not be a successful outcome. The White House earlier this week said that this was really just an initial meeting between the leaders. They called it a listening exercise rather than a one and done meeting where they hope to achieve lasting peace for Ukraine out of the back of what was discussed in Alaska. We're also told from the White House that this is about beginnings, bringing the beginnings of peace, rather. They're hopeful that there will be a ceasefire longer term, but they're not thinking that that will be discussed, or at least there will be a successful outcome in Alaska. For Donald Trump himself, he will have to walk a very narrow tightrope during these discussions. We know that Vladimir Putin is a master tactician. We know that he is very good at flattery, good at getting his way, good at manipulating the situation. And Donald Trump, who likes to be flattered, may find himself on the receiving end of some very heavy flattery and diplomacy from the top official in Russia. And therefore, Donald Trump will have to be careful that he's not agreeing to things and giving away potentially huge amounts of territory, handing that over wholesale to Russia during the course of this meeting. He'll have to be careful because, as we have seen in the past, when US presidents meet with President Putin, it's not always a favourable outcome. Back in 2001, the then US President George W. Bush met with Putin. They sat down. President Bush talked about how he was able to look Putin in the eye, and he came away saying that Putin was trustworthy. Of course, that hasn't been the case in the years since then, and that was something of a stain on President Bush's record. So Donald Trump goes into this saying that it will be high stakes, hoping that he can achieve things, but perhaps not getting everything that he wants during the course of this single meeting in Alaska.
And maybe bringing in the factor around Ukraine, and we do know that Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelenskyy is not part of this meeting. Can we expect anything tangible in that regard if he is not being represented in this meeting?
Yeah, that's a real problem for Ukraine and for European leaders because they are looking at this summit taking place a continent away, and they are very fearful that Donald Trump will be going into this and agreeing things that are not in the best interest of Ukraine. Donald Trump, though, on his way to Alaska, he's still currently traveling, but when he got on the plane earlier, he spoke to reporters and he said that he was not planning to negotiate on the behalf of Ukraine. He said really that was up to Ukraine itself. He said his goal during the course of this meeting was to essentially create a separate meeting, a trilateral meeting between President Putin, President Zelenskyy and himself at a later date. And at that meeting, Donald Trump said that would be the opportunity for President Zelenskyy to try and come to some sort of negotiated peace, which might be involving concessions where Ukraine has to give up territory that Russia has taken over the course of the last 3.5 years in this conflict. But even so, what we've seen during the course of this week with President Zelenskyy visiting leaders in both Germany and the United Kingdom is a considerable amount of concern from Europe that Donald Trump is going into this and sidelining them in discussions with the Russian leader.
And Nick, maybe let's also then talk about the location and where this meeting is taking place. What's the significance about Alaska and why we see this meeting take place there?
Yeah, interesting the location of this, because there was some discussion that potentially the meeting could take place in Europe or the Middle East. We even saw the Russian leader suggest the United Arab Emirates as his preferred location, but they ended up choosing Alaska, a place that was once owned by Russia itself and then sold to the United States. The discussions will take place on an airbase, and of course geographically it is still very close to Russia. It works as a nice in-between meeting point for the two leaders coming from opposite sides of the world and meeting there. But the thinking has been from experts in Washington that Donald Trump is trying to show some goodwill to the Russian leader, choosing that as a location, showing that it is an area of land that was once owned by Russia, now owned by the United States, but they have that shared interest in the region. They have the ability to get on as they did in the past when they agreed the sale of Alaska. And perhaps Donald Trump is trying to show, with the location being Alaska, that the two countries can work together again despite years of very, very rocky relations, really as a result of what's taken place in Ukraine.
Nick, thank you so much for your time. That's Nick Harper there giving us the latest updates when it comes to that meeting that is expected to take place this evening. Of course, as you heard there from our correspondent, saying that US President Donald Trump is still on his way to Alaska, and it is expected to take place at around 9 p.m. South African time.